go. I think. Bye, my dear. Thank you, darling. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us today. If you are new or newish to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Boulder, we ask that you please fill out our UUCB visitor form. The information is in the chat. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Steve Todd, worship leader for this service, and we welcome you all to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Boulder. We're so glad to have you joining us this morning, and we welcome you to this time of devotion, this opportunity to be knit together, which is the meaning of the word religion, and to this opportunity to affirm the dignity and worth of each of us and of that which is larger than all of us, which is the meaning of worship. The Unitarian Universalist Church of Boulder exists to foster that kind of religion and to offer that kind of worship in this community. And I too would like to extend a special word of welcome to any first-time visitors and those who are relatively new to our fellowship. I invite you to email our office manager, Amy Zen, and let us know that you found us, and her email has been posted in the Zoom room chat box. Also, please explore the church website for more information on church activities, especially our blog Touchpoint, and that will also be posted in the chat space. Now, this morning we have a special announcement about covenant groups, and Sharon Ballou will tell us more.
Are you feeling more anxiety and less certainty and less connection in this world of COVID pandemic and political pandemonium? Well, disconnection hurts. Disconnection from the world, disconnection from our church, and especially disconnection from our lives as they used to be. While many are working virtually, and virtually everyone is social distancing, the seasons are changing. Summer to fall and soon to winter. UUCB on Pennsylvania Avenue is closed to us through the end of the year. How are we to stay connected to our congregation? Well, if you've been yearning for deeper relationships with other people at UUCB, we have a small group ministry program to nurture that need. It's called Soul Matters. Soul Matters monthly themes provide the materials for the focus of our reflections and guiding our discussions in small groups of 5 to 8 people who will meet once or twice a month on Zoom. Each group makes a covenant, and each group has a trained facilitator to lead the practice of deep listening and confidential sharing. Soul Matters small groups support our exploration and our understanding of our inner lives. And they also provide a sense of belonging in our congregation. If you are interested in joining a small group, a Soul Matters group, or you just want more information, please send me an email, twenhopeful@aol.com. This is Sharon Ballou for Soul Matters.
Thank you, Sharon.
You're welcome.
Following the service, we will offer an immediate opportunity to gather in smaller groups, an approximation of our traditional coffee and fellowship time. And if you are one of the newish, I hope you will find the greeters table where you can learn more about our church. Now, please ensure that your microphones remain muted and join us for worship.
Join me in this call to worship before we move into our chalice lighting. I invite you to hear these words from my colleague, Eric Williams. In the beginning, there was light, infinite and expansive, flowing out from an unseen center. Throughout creation, there is light, from the steady sun, the glowing moon, the flashing meteor, the twinkling stars, and the auroras dancing in the northern skies. Within each part of creation, there is light, slowed down and held close by every cell and molecule, by each atom and element. And within you there is light, the same light as the source, the same radiance that is in all creatures. May this time together be a constant reminder to you of your true nature and your kinship with all beings. May it be so. Ashe. Please join us in our chalice lighting.
Hey, Steve, you are muted. Thank you.
Sorry, thanks. If you have a personal chalice or candle near your computer, please get ready to light it. We invite you to type into the chat box where your chalice is lit, the street or neighborhood or what city, if you're joining us from outside of Boulder. And now I'd like to introduce to you Peter Rumenier, who will do our chalice lighting today. Peter?
My name is Peter Rumenier. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. My name is Peter Rumenier. I have been a Unitarian for 15 years. I moved from Vermont to Louisville in July. I've been deeply moved by the hospitality of UUCB. You have done a terrific job of adapting to the pandemic. I want to make sure you know how welcoming you are. I lived most of my life in New England. I came here to help my daughter and her family out for a few years. They're a very happy set of mother and father, daughter and son. I myself come from a family of 8. The theme for this week is Boulder, a creation story. It has been described as follows, and I'm going to read this. On Indigenous Peoples Day, come hear the story of how we got to where we are, informed by Indigenous, scientific, and European sources. I look forward to hearing how Jeremy handles this very interesting topic in his reflection. I will give you a few brief words of what creation means to me. I want a creation story which is of today. I want a creation story which is written in the book, which Henry Thoreau calls the gospel of this moment. I want to hear Henry Thoreau's cock crow in the morning, each morning, to a new and strange world, and I do not want to tarry in bed. I want each morning to be an experience of openness, new eyes, new tastes, so that I can embrace every uncertainty, every loss, every renewal, every love with equal thanks. I want my heart to ask, why is it that nature is beautiful? Why is it that Colorado is beautiful? Why is it that I fear some people and situations, but get great joy from others? Why is it that some moments in my life are much more real than others? In other words, every morning, I want to be aware of creation. I light this chalice in fellowship.
We invite all those gathered in your various locations to join together in fellowship and community as we all say aloud our congregation's covenant. The words are in your online order of service and here on the screen. We gather in fellowship to speak truth to each other, to reach out and touch one another, to care with each other, and to seek
Seek the truth
to
alone.
So
So be it.
So be it.
In this deep connection with all of life, let us tune into our own joys and concerns. What is on your mind and in your heart today? In the quiet of your own thoughts, lift up all that weighs on you. Grief, worry, pain, whatever it is, let us hold this and each other in silence. Now let us turn our minds and hearts to those we love, holding them with love, acknowledging their painful challenges and sufferings. And as we do, I invite you now to share your concerns in the chat box. I will name a few of them. There's a lot that we're holding today. Anxieties about our upcoming election, all the divisions of identity that we're seeing as we move towards it. We have our personal concerns for our loved ones that are hurting, our pets, our beloved dog Daisy, friends of ours struggling with impossible diagnoses, the loss of Kate's father-in-law, Irving, who passed away 5 days ago. We are with you, Kate. Bab's brother, who's having difficult walking. Sharon is thinking of her husband's Abenaki ancestors. So glad they could be here in our cloud of love and understanding. The smoke outside. We offer all the love in our hearts to hold all that has been shared and all that remains on our hearts, silently, not ready to be spoken yet. Please continue to post if you wish. Yes, Dalbert, I am with you, thinking of your wife who passed away so recently. We offer love and witness to those who are suffering. I also invite you not just to bring to your mind, but to bring into your heart the things for which you are grateful for and are bringing you joy in these times. We need to share our joy now more than ever, so please post your joys and celebrations in the chat box now. Yes, we are indeed blessed by Peter. What a beautiful chalice lighting. So glad you found us in your move. My daughter raked a giant pile of leaves in our front yard this week and jumped in it, and if that's not joy, I don't know what is. Those beautiful autumn leaves reminding us of beauty, just pure beauty. Friends and community, visiting family, those of us getting out into nature to enjoy the beautiful fall colors. And yes, even a blessing for Zoom, which, as imperfect as it is, allows us to be together in these times. Please keep posting your joys as you wish. I sure need to read them all. Fred and Barb marked the 40th anniversary of their first date this week. That's an exciting one. Don't want to miss that. Oh, all the delicious pumpkin food coming our way. Absolutely. For all these blessings and all the very real concerns, as well as everything we left silently on our hearts, we hold this compassionate space with love. And I'm so grateful for all the ways that you continue to bless each other. Ashe.
Following is the Arapaho story of creation, which was put together based on stories that had been recorded in the late 1800s. There was a deluge, nothing but water. A man was walking around on the water for 4 days and 4 nights carrying a flat pipe. He wondered what he could do to protect it. For a total of 6 days, he walked around with the pipe, weeping and fasting. On the morning of the 7th day, he decided there needed to be earth for the pipe to rest on. So he called to the 4 directions, northwest, northeast, southeast, and southwest, for people to come and help find land. Then he called forth 7 cottonwood trees, though there was still no dry land, and then called forth creatures of the air and the sea. He asked if anyone knew where land was. The turtle said that it was at the bottom of the ocean. So the man asked the animals if they could dive down and find it. A series of creatures dives for the land. First, the grebe. Second, 2 waterfowl. Third, 3 waterfowl, including the kingfisher. Fourth, otter, beaver, packed bird, which we now call a coot, and garter snake. Fifth, black snake, 2 kinds of ducks, goose, and a crane. Sixth, all the creatures dive, but each time they fail. Then the 7th dive is made by turtle in the company of the man. Before the man dives, he ritually moves the flat pipe 4 times, then touches it to his body a 5th time, and it turns into a red-headed duck, and it accompanies him on the dive along with the turtle. Both the duck and the turtle succeed in bringing up a sod of earth for the man, Arapaho. The man then dried the earth, cast it in 4 directions, southeast, southwest, northwest, and northeast, and created the earth.
The tide is rising, and so are we. The tide is rising, and so are we. The tide is rising, and so are we. This is where we are called to be. This is where we are called to be. The tide is rising, and so are we. The tide is rising, and so are we. The tide is rising, and so are we. This is where we are called to be. This is where we are called to be. The task is mighty, and so are we. The task is mighty, and so are we. The task is mighty, and so are we. This is where we are called to be. This is where we are called to be. The land is holy, and so are we. The land is holy, and so are we. The land is holy, and so are we. This is where we are called to be. Oh, this is where we are called to be. The world is ready, and so are we. The world is ready, and so are we. The world is ready, and so are we. This is where we are called to be. This is where we are called to be. Oh, this is where we are called to be.
Wow, that was really powerful, Deborah. Thank you so much for sharing your musical gifts with us. I invite you to close your eyes and listen to this story. It occurred in a moment before moments, not still, nor quiet or vast, but simply nothing. A great cosmic explosion and subsequent ripple of space-time. In those first dynamic moments of unfolding, all was simply a dense heat. But as cooling began a few milliseconds later, suddenly the conditions were ripe for the creation of all the building blocks of matter. Quarks began gathering into protons and neutrons, and then, after the first minute or two that ever was, the protons and neutrons danced into nuclei. A mere 380,000 years later, nuclei attracted electrons to spin around them, creating the first atoms. Helium and hydrogen burst into being, and over the next 200 million years, slowly formed into clouds of gas and dust particles, which eventually collapsed in on themselves and created suns. Somewhere between 5 and 6 billion years ago, one of these suns began running out of energy and exploded, bursting forth with all of the elements that we know today. Our sun and shortly thereafter its planets were created through this same process about 4.6 billion years ago. Though in many ways unspectacular, with an ordinary central core, a rocky mantle, and solid crust, the placement of the third rock from the sun just so far away that it wasn't too hot and just close enough that it wasn't too cold set it up for a most interesting future. But the first billion or so years of our planet's existence was one of constant bombardment by asteroids and comets as the surface churned with molten-like activity. At some point in this time, our moon formed and was captured by our gravity, and 3.7 billion years ago, our crust solidified, and right around this same time, give or take a few 100 million years, through a process still shrouded in mystery and conjecture, out of the primordial soup of our planet, life, in the form of the most simple single-celled organisms, sprung into being. It took another 3 billion years for those simple organisms to begin forming more complex multi-celled organisms, but when they did, about 610 million years ago, it triggered an absolute explosion of life forms. After another 100 or so million years, plants and fungi appeared, soon followed by amphibians and insects to eat them. And 100 million years later, just as reptiles began crawling out of the ocean to warm their bodies in the sun, the story of Boulder and the land that most of us are on right now truly begins. It begins, however, not a mile high, but rather a mile deep. At this point, the land we inhabit now was under a vast inland ocean and was deep below the surface, filled with all nature of underwater creatures. And for hundreds of millions of years, this interior sea began the process of slowly wearing away at the sandstone below it, forming it into the iconic shapes of the flat irons we love to look upon. While the devil's thumb remained deep underwater, life continued its advance in form as birds took flight and simple plant life gave birth to exotic flowers. And then, about 65 million years ago, an asteroid roughly the size of Manhattan almost ended it all before we even got to the first Big Mac, when it impacted the Earth just off the coast of Mexico with devastating results, exterminating most dinosaur species in an instant, with a few small animals and many plants surviving to once again begin the advance of creation. At about this same time, a major tectonic plate shift began in the Pacific Ocean, pushing underneath what we now know as the North American continent, thrusting thousands of miles of Earth into the air and eventually forming the Rocky Mountains, finally freeing our beautifully carved flat irons from the salty depths of the inland sea, which disappeared altogether. At this point, mammals were becoming quite complex, and on the African continent, sometime between 12 and 2 million years ago, one particularly hairy mammal species split into two distinct groups, one remaining in the forest to run around on all fours and become the great apes, and another that began to walk only on their back two legs and moved out of the forest to begin to cultivate the land. These are our ancestors, And by about 1.8 million years ago, our great ancient ancestors began to walk fully upright. It was not until a mere 50,000 years ago that humans began to migrate up and out of Africa to populate the rest of the habitable earth. And only a short 13,000 to 30,000 or so years ago that a particularly brave group wandered across a narrow and precarious ice bridge between Siberia and Alaska. For the next 10,000 years or more, the original settlers of this continent spread far and wide, creating vast and advanced civilizations stretching along the east and west coast of North America, as well as deep into Mexico and South America. Their populations numbered in the millions. The earliest known human settlement in the Front Range was dated to about 11,000 years ago and was found just outside of Fort Collins on a site that included art, arrowheads, and many signs of complex community life. And from that point on, it's clear that many groups of people made their home in this area for the same reason that people are attracted to it to this day, for the same reason you are here. It's abundant with resources, and compared to much of this part of the country, it enjoys a relatively mild winter, often interrupted by incredibly warm days. So it's no surprise that over the years, it became the winter home for Native American tribes like the Utes, Cheyenne, Comanches, and Sioux. The Arapaho had spent most of their tribal history living in the Great Lakes area. But when they were introduced to the horse in the 1800s, they quickly spread and grew in numbers, eventually becoming so large that they were forced to split into two groups, the Northern and Southern Arapaho. In this time, they moved into what is now Montana, Kansas, Wyoming, Nebraska, and even Colorado. In the late 1700s and early 1800s, just as the United States of America was declaring independence from England thousands of miles away, some members of the Southern Arapaho tribe arrived in this exact area and settled near what we now call Haystack Mountain, making it their winter camp, while still returning to the plains in the summer to hunt buffalo. In 1825, a young boy was born who would grow up to be the leader of the Southern Arapaho in this area. He would eventually earn the name Chief Niwot, due to his unique stature of being left-handed. Niwot meaning left-handed in the Arapaho language. Besides the town of Niwot and several local schools that directly bear his name, the local Left Hand Canyon and Left Hand Creek, as well as Left Hand Brewery, all still reference him to this day. Chief Niwot and his tribe considered Valmont Butte, which lies just east of the city, to be sacred. And on a trip to visit this site in the fall of 1858, he and a small group met the first Europeans to enter this area in search of gold. While Chief Niwot greeted them peacefully and offered these strangers a meal and gifts, he also asked them in no uncertain terms to leave. Led by Captain Aiken, the treasure hunters assured Chief Niwot that they would only stay through the winter and then be gone. However, they quickly began building permanent structures along the river, and as the story goes, one night, as Chief Niwot tossed and turned trying to sleep, he finally fell into an anxious dream in which a mighty flood came roaring down from the mountains and wiped away all of his tribe's homes, but left the European invaders' homes standing undamaged. When he awoke, he told others of his dream and said that it meant these gold seekers would not stop coming and would flood the land with their numbers and wipe away the Arapaho if they resisted. He determined then that peaceful coexistence was the only way to protect his people, and so switched strategies to welcoming the newcomers. However, not without a warning, which has become known as the curse of Boulder, when he said, "People, seeing the beauty of this valley, will want to stay, and their staying will be the undoing of the beauty." This experiment in peaceful coexistence did not last long, and tensions finally boiled over in 1864, when Territorial Governor John Evans ordered all Indigenous people to move to a plot of land near Fort Lyons called Sand Creek. Later that fall, while the Civil War raged on far to the east, a bloodthirsty colonel named Shivington attacked the peaceful encampment at Sand Creek and massacred the men, women, and children, including Chief Niwot. Even against the backdrop of the raging Civil War, this atrocity did not go unnoticed or unpunished, as President Abraham Lincoln demanded a congressional investigation, and rather quickly, Congress officially named this a massacre and not a battle. This led to Colonel Shivington being censored for his actions, while the governor was removed from office and martial law was declared across the state of Colorado. This kicked off a terrible period of war between the invading white settlers and the native people, which lasted for almost 3 decades. Amidst this violent period in 1871, on November 4th to be precise, the city of Boulder, Colorado was incorporated. And less than a decade later, in 1882, one of the defining moments in Boulder history happened when they broke ground on the university campus. Just a year later, in 1883, the Reverend Thomas J. Van Ness delivered a sermon to Boulder's first Unitarian Society. Van Ness accepted a call to Denver Unitarian Church in 1884, and the Boulder group couldn't find a permanent minister, so they disbanded around 1890, the same year that the Daily Camera began operating, and only 3 years before Colorado women won the right to vote, 23 years before Congress passed the 19th Amendment. And in 1901, everything changed for this area when oil was discovered. This led to an infusion of capital and growth. By 1917, the streets of Boulder were paved. In 1936, the Boulder Theater opened, and a decade later, in 1946, a small but no doubt eclectic and interesting group of Boulder residents began to meet on campus with an active student organization, the CU Religious Liberals. And in the summer of 1948, on July 30th, the Unitarian Fellowship of Boulder received the first fellowship charter issued by the American Unitarian Association. 3 years later, in 1951, NIST was built, and a year later, construction was completed on the Denver-Boulder Turnpike, needed to get all those workers into the growing town of Boulder. In 1958, the local Unitarian congregation elected to reincorporate as the Unitarian Church of Boulder. In 1961, NCAR was built, and 2 years later, in June of 1963, ground was broken for our current church building on Pennsylvania Avenue. The first service in the new building was held on Christmas Eve. In 1967, at the doorstep of the countercultural revolution, after 60 years legally dry, prohibition ended in Colorado, and we can only guess that one heck of a party ensued. That same year, Boulder approved the now famous open space sales tax in order to fight against that curse of Niwot that was becoming more and more evident by the year. By 1970, the city population had tripled from just 2 decades earlier, all the way to 67,000 people. Yes, when people see this valley, they do want to stay. In 1975, Boulder, continuing its tradition of being a trailblazer, issued the first ever same-sex marriage license. A year later, in 1976, the Pearl Street Pedestrian Mall opened, and in 1979, the annual Boulder kicked off, just as the local Unitarian congregation was officially renamed the Unitarian Universalist Church of Boulder. The farmers market began a few years later in 1986, and that same year, artists in Dushanbe, Tajikistan, began 10 years of construction on a hand-carved painted wooden tea house that would arrive in Boulder in 1997 and remains beautiful and in operation to this day. In 2010, the area was hit by the devastating 4 Mile Canyon fire, and shortly thereafter, in 2013, with a 1,000-year flood. Most of you probably know the details of the story from here. Sometime in this last chapter, you were born and or moved to this city and found this incredible congregation. The story of Boulder is our story now. And I tell you today the story of what led up to this moment, because how it continues from here is up to all of us. I believe that just as the world is made up of atoms created billions of years ago in a fiery blast of space-time, it's also made up of stories. Stories that we create and recreate every moment to this day. The power of story to shape reality, and especially the power of creation myths to shape the future, is every bit as awe-inspiring to me as the story of the Big Bang. As Marnie Gillard, a master storyteller, has said, quote, "We need to look hard at the stories we create and wrestle with them, retell and retell them, and work with them like clay. It is in the retelling and returning that they give us their wisdom," unquote. There is much I see to be proud about in the details of the Boulder story. There is good clay here for the working. There is an unmistakable streak of being ahead of the curve with the women's right to vote, same-sex marriage, and conservation of land. But at the same time, we leave out the stories of those who came before us. And by erasing their contributions and wisdom, we also silently continue to prevent their participation in the good that has come since. This land that we stand upon, which was first created in a cosmic blast and was then slowly formed and shaped deep underwater, until millions of years ago when it was thrust a mile high up into the sky. This beautiful place we call Boulder was undeniably taken for us through trickery, force, and murder. And that is not a story that we tell at all when we are going about our daily lives in this beautiful place. We may pay lip service to those that were here before us by naming a few hills, schools, and towns after them. But it's hard to miss the fact that in this creation story of Boulder I told today, once the Southern Arapaho are murdered in the Sand Creek Massacre, the town as we know it suddenly burst into life and has moved on without pause ever since. But not for those related to the ones who were here first. This summer, when we could stand being quarantined in our home no more, I took my family on a physically distanced camping trip up north that brought us right through the Wind River Reservation, where the Northern Arapaho were forcibly resettled. It was the first time I ever experienced a reservation, and it was shocking and eye-opening. I witnessed a level of poverty and hopelessness that I had never before seen in our country. And I realized that what we did to the indigenous communities is not over. I guess it let me off the hook to tell their story as something that happened long ago and is now done with. But this is a convenient myth, a lie, really. The decimation, abuse, and destruction of the indigenous people continue to this moment. It's an active thing going on right now. We are in no way off the hook for it because it is a part of our story. And we need to start telling it that way. We must keep reworking that clay from which we sprung until it truly serves all. And that is my invitation to you today on Indigenous Peoples Day. To find ways or to deepen your commitment to finding new ways to bring that story into your story. It won't fix the terrible wrongs that have been done to get us here, but perhaps it can be the start of a long overdue healing and the beginning of a new story. May it be so, and Ashe.
When you make a donation to UUCB, you are practicing generosity and supporting the work that we do together to create love, justice, and peace in the world. During the month of October, we share our plate with CIRC, the Colorado Immigrant Rights Coalition, a statewide membership-based coalition of immigrant, faith, labor, youth, and other communities. Founded in 2002 to improve the lives of immigrants and refugees by making Colorado a more welcoming, immigrant-friendly state. For Gladys Ibarra, growing up as an undocumented person and later as a DACA recipient, this has meant living with an enormous amount of uncertainty and a part of herself which felt unsafe to share. She started volunteering with CIRC on and off in 2012, but it wasn't until Trump began to threaten the DACA program in 2017 that she was launched into a leadership role as part of a massive series of walkouts that CIRC organized to defend the program and protect the 700,000 DACA recipients from deportation. It was scary while I was doing it, she recalls, but it also felt really empowering. That day inspired Gladys to pursue a career in immigrant rights advocacy. She now works at CIRC, managing policy campaigns and coordinating their 24/7 hotline for people to report ICE activity and abuses of power. She says, initially I saw this coalition as a way to protect myself and my family. But when I started working as its hotline coordinator, very quickly I realized that my family was not just my sisters and my parents, but it was everybody that was calling our hotline. Everybody that looks to any organization like ours that has ever had a mixed status family or a family of undocumented people. I see them as my immediate family now. But when it comes down to the basics, it's not about me going from not being able to feel safe in saying this is who I am, and to empowering others, directly impacted people, to see the power of their words and recognize that they can be part of the change. You can make a donation now using the link posted in our chat or by sending a check to UUCB. Please be as generous as you can. We will now receive your offering. With much gratitude, this offering is received. May our gifts be used to enact justice, bringing peace and love to the Boulder community.
We are a gentle, angry people, and we are singing, singing for our lives. We are a gentle, angry people, and we are singing, singing for our lives. We are a justice-seeking people, and we are singing, singing for our lives.